Good morning, New Life. Man, you guys are finally getting this. That's good. It's good to be back. We survived the wedding. David and Cammie may be broke, but they're here. We got to celebrate Keely and all her people and John and so many people and so many conversations. But thank you guys for the way that you encouraged and have led. It's so good to see someone grow up in their faith and continue that. And that was a big part of what we saw. I'm glad you're here. It seems like most of you still have your fingers and everything, except Ruby. I noticed she had a hurt hand. I hope it wasn't from fireworks. But we all survived our 250th celebration of our Day of Independence. It's hard for me to imagine that 56 men and their families. They don't talk about their families, but can you imagine what they went through the night before they decided that, or the days ahead as they've contemplated that when we put our name on this, we have officially become a target. And they did, and they sacrificially, they put their name on that document that would change the history of not just establishing this country, but it changed the history of the world from that point on. But some of them at a great cost. And the Bible tells us that true love is when a man lays down his life for another. And so many of them did that and put a target on their back, not just for them, but their family. And we're so thankful. I will say that I feel like the United States of America is the greatest country on this earth. I didn't say perfect. I said the greatest. Even with all of our challenges and difficulties, there is this idea. David and I did not talk about what his communion thought was and what I was going to begin, but that woven into the fabric of this country is this idea of freedom that we started, and it is so much a natural part of who we are. We cannot imagine what other countries and people of other countries go through. I mean, you think it. If you want to go and take a trip across the United States of America, you don't have to get permission. You don't have to go to your government to say, hey, this is where I'm going. You just kind of load up and you and your family go. It's free opportunity. We have so many rights that it has become a part of who we are. And I think sometimes we miss out on that. If you go to a government or a country that tells you what you can and can't earn, you're like, that doesn't happen anymore, you want to bet. Go to another country. It happens. Or if you go to a country where you cannot worship God freely, instead, you have to hide or you have to look at other things. We forget what we have. What we sometimes argue about and fight about is truly a gift. And yet, the gift that was given to us was a sacrifice by so many people in the generations before us. You see, we were blessed by the sacrifices of our predecessors in those generations. And for that, I think we should be eternally grateful, but even more so, I think we should be eternally grateful to a God who saw all of this and orchestrated it as well. So if you don't mind, I would like to begin today with prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you and we thank you that from the minute they began discussing about having the United States be in their own kingdom, they consulted you. Didn't mean they were perfect men or they had perfect ideas, but they were men who sought you. And they listened, and the freedoms that we have reflect the freedoms that you've given us. And God, I pray that you would be with our country. I pray that you be with our leaders. But I pray that you would be with each of us as individuals, that we would make a difference in the world in which we live in at this moment. To remember, to reflect, but also to project to the future the things that you have done, and to keep you at the foundation and the core of our life. In your Son's name we pray. Amen. So today we begin our postcard. This is, I think, the fourth postcard, and today is Obadiah. Let me just ask, how many of you read Obadiah? Okay. How many of you remember much of anything out of Obadiah? Yeah, I'm kind of the same way I was till I began this. It is the smallest book in the Old Testament. So if you're a person that doesn't like to read, hey, this may be one you want to start with because it's only 21 verses. And you're like, hey, I've read a whole book of the Bible, and you can feel good about yourself, but it's just 21 verses. The book of Obadiah is a prophecy. And as the Bible is categorized, they have this thing called the 12 minor prophets. And people are like, why are they minor prophets? Because their book's short. It's real technical. And so they're one of the 12. And Obadiah's name simply means servant of God or worshiper of God. This is not an unusual name. It's a common name that comes from the Bible. Obadiah would have been a prophet. And we just have this about him, this little short book from about 587 to 537 BC. And the reason we know it was that time is not because he put that in there. It's because that's when Babylon overtakes Judah. And if you want to put that in context, that's the story of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It's during that time is when Obadiah would have made his prophecy. And he has something to say about them. And so here is a difficult time in the time of Judah, and they're sitting there, and they're being exported or taken as captive and hauled to a foreign land and made into slaves. To make matters worse, and this is what Obadiah addresses, is that some people who were supposed to be distant relatives caused even more hurt and pain in their lives, and we're going to look into that for most of this book today. But before we can truly understand this postcard, I want us to look. There's one core verse that is going to kind of outline everything. It's found in verse 15. It says this: "The day of the Lord is near for all nations. As you have done, it will be done to you. Your deeds will return upon your own head." I think sometimes you're like, man, I'd kind of like to use that verse. I got a few friends or enemies that I would like to pay back. Sometimes people say, well, that's karma. That's all that necessarily is. Or you're getting what's coming to you. That's what people refer to. But this isn't that. This is God saying, I have a judgment upon these people. And part of the reason he has a judgment is because they forgot where their foundation was. They forgot what is important. As I reflect on the 250th year of the United States of America, sometimes we have to go back and look at our foundation. What's our foundation? What does it look like? And the people of Edom had forgotten their foundation. But in order to understand the depth, so today, if you hate history, I'm sorry, you're stuck here. We're going to have a history lesson. Because in order to understand what Obadiah is writing, you have to understand the history. And we can go back several hundred years in Genesis chapter 25, starting in verse 23, and we catch up to the beginning of this people called Edom, but not just the people of Edom, the beginning of the Israelite nation. And here's what it says. The Lord said to her, God is talking to Rebekah. Rebekah is married to Isaac. And if you want to put this into context, Abraham and Sarah had two sons, or Abraham had two sons. Sarah only had the one son with Abraham, and it's Isaac. And Isaac doesn't have a wife for a little while, and Abraham's like, you know, I've got to find you a spouse. And so he sends off, and Rebekah comes, and they kind of have this love story that is unusual. Because Isaac, it says that Rebekah sees Isaac, and she's kind of smitten, is what it says, which is an unusual description that you find in the Bible, but there it is. And Isaac and Rebekah seem to have this love story, but their story also mimics Abraham and Sarah's. They have trouble having children. But finally she gets pregnant, and God comes to Rebekah and says, I want to give you what's going to go on in your life. And here's what he says: 2 nations are in your womb, and two peoples are from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other. The older will serve the younger. And when the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her room. Now get this. I mean, I know you may get it, but they didn't have a sonogram back in Israel at that time, or where they were. And God kind of gives her a clue. You got two nations. When she heard two nations, she knew, I'm having boys. So they decorated the room for boys. They didn't have to plan or didn't have to wait. They were ready for it. And he says, you have two boys. Listen to the description. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment. I wonder if Rebecca, he comes out and she's like, oh goodness, what happened? I love that. You know, maybe she's like every other mother, is beautiful. That's the most beautiful kid. So they name him Esau. And after this, his brother comes out with his hand grasping Esau's heel. And he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. Do you see some of the similarities between the families here? Isaac and Rebekah wanted kids so much. And like Abraham and Sarah, they had prayed and they had prayed. And when it finally happens, God says, you know what? You're not just going to have one, you're going to have two. But it seems as if these are the only two kids that they have. God says, I want to tell you something about this. The younger child will be the boss of the older, or the older will serve the younger. In that culture, that didn't happen. In that culture, the oldest son was the one who was the leader of the family, would carry it on. So the first one born was Edom, or Esau, and the word Edom just simply means red, and the second was Jacob. It's kind of interesting. It seems like from this point in history, Isaac looks at Esau and says, well, this one is my son. And he loves Esau, is what the Bible says. And he loved him because he hunted, and he was a man's man. He was just this guy that went out and attacked life, didn't think about anything. Whereas Jacob, it says, stayed around the tents. He stayed around the women, learning how to cook and learning what goes on. And so here are two totally different personalities from these twins, and they were polar opposites. And I don't know if Rebecca remembers God's promise, and so she realizes, I've got to make sure Jacob's ready for this, or if it just happens. Anyway, one day, as we move forward, Esau returns from a hunt. And it had to have been unsuccessful, because he comes and he finds his brother and he smells that Jacob has been cooking a red lentil stew. And he's like, oh, I've got to have some of that. And he tells his brother, I will give anything for that bowl of soup. Now, I've been hungry before, but never a bowl of beans that could say, I'll give anything. But he was that hungry. And Jacob, as his name kind of indicates, was crafty and maybe deceitful, you would even say. And you know what he says? If you're that hungry, how about you sell me your birthright? Esau says, sounds like a good deal. What is a birthright going to do me any good if I'm dead? And so he signs away his birthright. And you're like, well, what does that mean? Oh, he was born a minute before you? We're going to switch places on the birth certificate? No. A birthright meant this. The oldest son in the Jewish culture, and almost every culture in that day, got double the portion of any other child in their inheritance. And so before, Esau would have had 2/3 of the inheritance, whereas Jacob been 1/3. But because of that agreement, Jacob now gets 2/3 and Esau gets 1/3. But it doesn't seem to bother Esau. Well, it continues on, and eventually Isaac is coming to the point that he's going to die. And that culture, and throughout Jewish history, if you will read through that, the father brings in the sons and he gives them blessing. And so Isaac calls in Esau, and I'm sure Isaac has known what has taken place. And he said, Esau, here's what I want as my last meal. Go out and kill some wild game and prepare me a dish that you know I like. And then I will bless you, my son. It seems as if Rebekah was listening to the conversation that Isaac had just had. And she goes and grabs Jacob and says, hurry. We've got to have you to cook your dad a meal. And so that he can bless you, not your brother. Well, Jacob's like, Mom, this isn't a very good idea. I mean, look at Esau. He's covered in hair. And I am not. Even though Dad is blind and on his deathbed, he's going to know who it is. And she plots and helps him understand how to fool his dad, to which Jacob does. And just as he leaves after getting the blessing from his dad, Esau walks in. And Esau says, Dad, here's your food. I want my blessing. And Isaac said, you're too late. In chapter 27, the Bible records this. It says, when Esau heard his father's words, he burst out with a loud and bitter cry and said to his father, bless me too, my father. But he said, your brother came deceitfully and he took your blessing. Can you imagine the anger of Esau? Here he'd come, he'd gone out and done just what his dad said, and his mother and his brother had stolen his blessing. And Isaac doesn't have much left to give Esau. But Esau begs. In fact, it continues in verse 38. It says, Esau said to his father, do you have only one blessing, my father? In other words, isn't there anything left to give me, Dad? Or did you give it all to my brother? Bless me too, my father. And then Esau wept aloud. And his father Isaac answered him, your dwelling will be away from the earth's richness and away from the dew of heaven above. You will live by the sword and you will serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you will throw his yoke off from your neck. Esau gets the leftovers from his dad. He even says you're eventually going to be enslaved. Your people will be enslaved by your brothers. Rebekah realizes, Jacob, you're about to die. Your brother's bigger, stronger, and knows how to hunt. You better leave. And Jacob takes off, and Esau hunts for him. But Jacob returns to Rebekah's family. In fact, marries two of her brother's daughters. That's a whole nother sermon. We'll talk about that at another time. But Jacob marries two women. He wanted to marry Rachel, but Rebekah's brother Laban gives him Leah instead, and then he has to work another 7 years for the one he really wanted. But by the time Jacob is ready to come back, he has 12 sons, which will later become the 12 tribes of Israel. But when he returns, Jacob is still scared after all those years of Esau, and they meet. And Jacob sends some of his people out in front with gifts for Esau to kind of appease his anger. And Esau has no anger. They seem to work it out. But by the time we arrive in Obadiah, those two brothers have become two countries and two groups of people. Israel, which would have been the 10 tribes and two other tribes, and they've even split apart. And now the southern two tribes is still fighting with Edom. The northern 10 tribes have been defeated by the Assyrians, and the southern two tribes, including Judah, have just been attacked by the Babylonian Empire. And that is the background where we arrive to the book of Obadiah. And if you read it, we can come up with 4 short points that I think we can. I'm not going to read every verse of it. I hope that you go back and read it. But I hope to help you make some sense about what Obadiah says. But I want you to remember, Jacob and Esau, Jacob and Edom, Judah and Edom are brothers. And yet over the years, they diverge and things begin to happen. And the first point is this: God's judgment on Edom. Obadiah dives right in, and he is upset about Edom and what they've done. And he repeats God's judgment. And it begins in verse 2. It says, "See, I will make you small among the nations. You will be utterly despised. The pride of your heart has deceived you. You who live in the clefts of the rocks and make your home on the heights. You who say to yourself, who can bring me to the ground? And though you soar like an eagle and make your nest among the stars, from there I will bring you down, declares the Lord." Obadiah says, you Edomites, you think you're safe because they live on Mount Seir in this red cliff. I don't know, the word red seems to always follow Esau and Edom from this point. But their home is a fortress, and they think they're impenetrable. And they are fighters and they're warriors, just like God had said this was what Jacob or Esau was going to be. Obadiah says, you think you're untouchable, you think that you're safe, but you will be destroyed and you will be ruined because of what you did. And he goes on, he says, but oh, how Esau will be ransacked. His treasures, hidden treasures, will be pillaged, and all your allies will force you to the border. Your friends will deceive and overpower you. Those who eat your bread will set a trap for you, but you will not detect it. In that day, declares the Lord, will I not destroy the wise men of Edom and those of whose understanding in the mountains of Esau? Your warriors, Teman, will be terrified, and everyone in Esau's mountains will be cut down in the slaughter. I don't know about you, but this is the part I think people struggle with a loving God, is it not? How can he say this? What did they do? What's so bad that God says every bit of money that you have is going to be taken from you? Every one of your people will be destroyed. You will be deceived by the people that you think can protect you, but they can't. Even your home, even your money, and even your strength will do nothing for you. You will be slaughtered. What did they do? I think sometimes we ask ourselves, does God feel that way about me when I sin, when I do something? So I think we have to answer the question, why God judged Edom. Why is he so angry? Why does he have so much wrath? Let's look at what Obadiah says. He says this, because of the violence. What? The reason Edom is being judged is because of how they treated their brother Jacob. He continues, you will be covered with shame. You will be destroyed forever. On the day you stand aloof while strangers carried off the wealth and foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were like one of them. You should not gloat over your brother in the day of his misfortune, nor rejoice over the people in Judah in the day of their destruction, nor boast so much in the day of their trouble. You should not march to the gates of my people in the day of their disaster, nor gloat over them in their calamity in the day of their disaster, nor seize their wealth in the day of their disaster. You should not wait at the crossroads to cut down their fugitives, nor hand over their survivors in the day of their trouble. Obadiah tells us, you want to know why God's angry? Your brother and his line, when the Babylonians came, not only did you watch, but you jeered and you laughed. And if that wasn't enough, you participated. You went in, and what was left over by the Babylonians, you went in and stole it. The Babylonians had destroyed the temple, and they took everything that was left in there with value. It says they stripped the gold that was put on there. That wasn't enough. So the Edomites, they walk in there and say, you know what? Everything's left we're going to take. And the survivors that were there would have had nothing to eat and nothing to sustain themselves because the Edomites took it from them. And then he continues, it says, it's not just there. You stood at the crossroads as people were trying to escape, and if you didn't kill them yourself, you handed them over. It angered God, and it crushed him to watch his people hurt, and then his creation had been a part of that. He says, but not forever. Your day of reckoning is here. And that is the next point, the day of the Lord. It's the verse we read at the beginning. It says, the day of the Lord is near for all nations. As you have done, it will be done to you. Your deeds will return upon your own head. God promises them what you did to other people will happen to you. History tells us this, that within 100 years, the Babylonians turn on the Edomites and destroy so many of them. They capture their cities in Mount Seir, and they are scattered. And it's so much so that later, as other kingdoms come into power, the Greeks, that even the term Edomites is changed to Idumeans. And from that point on, that's where they become known as, and they have to go through the Maccabean rebellion, and little by little, they're whittled down to almost nothing. But surprising, the last well-known Edomite is a man by the name of King Herod the Great, who served when Jesus was a baby. Do you remember what he tried to do? He tried to kill the Messiah after the wise men came through. And he met his death. And then in AD 70, the Romans began to conquer Jerusalem. They destroyed the temple again. And this time, they kill every person that could ever been traced as an Edomite. The day of the Lord, the day of judgment arrives. Please understand that God will not be mocked. You said, well, what does that mean? What does that mean for us? It means this. The people that sought to destroy God around us, he has two things he wants to happen. Or there's two outcomes. Number one, and this is his hope, that they turn and they find him. That they come and they repent and he restores and they get to go back, because that's what's getting ready to happen to Judah here. But the second is this: there will come a day, the day of the Lord, when God is the victor. And those things will be returned. If you've ever watched the history of the world, anybody that's ever punished the Jewish nation or mistreated them, you see those things happen over and over again. So while the day of the Lord meant destruction for the Edomites, it meant the restoration for Judah. He says this in verse 20, this company of Israelite exiles who are in Canaan will possess the land as far as Zarephath. The exiles from Jerusalem who are in the Sephard will possess the towns of the Negev. Deliverers will go up on Mount Zion to govern the mountains of Esau, and the kingdom will be the Lord's. You see, the day of the Lord promises destruction for the Edomites because they did what was hateful to God. But for the Jews, it will mean those captives will one day be free. You see, not only is this a promise that eventually, and we know it happens pretty quickly, that many of the Israelites get to go back and they get to rebuild the temple and they rebuild the city in Jerusalem, and then they also get to have the upper land of the Edomites. But it is also a prophetic thing talking about the coming of the Messiah. You're like, well, Ezel, this is all well and good. You've spent 20 minutes giving me a history lesson I didn't really want. What does that have to do with me? And I think there are some simple lessons that we can all take from this. The first is, don't ever forget your foundation in Christ. You see, the Edomites forgot the word of the Lord was in their lives, that God was the giver of all things. They forgot their connection to God. You and I need to make sure as believers that we never forget that our foundation is in the Lord. That when we gave our lives to Him and we took His forgiveness on us, that is the core of everything we do. That we step back and we look and we say, God, I want to follow you with all my heart, with all my soul, and with all my mind. That He is our foundation. You see, I think the longer we live and the further that we get from that time when we accepted Christ, if we're not careful, we tend to forget where we came from. We tend to forget the foundation that's there. You see, the Israelites weren't perfect. They made mistake after mistake after mistake. But guess what happened to them over and over again? They returned back to the God of their fathers. And they listened to them. So I'm going to tell you this. As a believer, don't ever forget the foundation that we have in the Lord. Don't forget about the decision you made back then. Don't ever lose your first love. I don't know if you remember before Christmas, at the first of the year, Brian was preaching about Revelation and the churches that were there. And one of the things that God had against the one church is they forgot their first love. I think sometimes we forget our first love because we get so tied up in the things of this world that we forget them. And we can't. We can't. Doesn't mean you're not going to fail or you're not going to have some trouble. It means that over and over and over, you go and you put your feet on Him and say, I'm here to stand. Help me, Lord. Peter says it this way in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 4 and 5. He says, as you come to Him, the living stone, rejected by humans, but chosen by God and precious to Him, you also, that's us, you're living stones. You're being built into a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God only through Jesus Christ. You see, God has chosen you and I. We're set aside. We're to be different. We're to look different, talk different, act different, love different. Because we're building a kingdom. And we're standing, our foundation is on the cornerstone of who God is and who Jesus is. You see, the day of the Lord was given so that we might have Him as a Savior that leads us forward. I think another thing that's very practical is this. Don't ever celebrate the downfall of somebody else. Have you ever said, that person gets what they deserve because of what they did to you? Have you ever said, well, karma? Or have you ever said, I wish? I have. The first one that strikes so familiar in my mind is this. About 25 years ago, I learned the death of my first cousin because of a motorcycle accident. In fact, it was right at 25 years ago. First, the story came out that he just had a motorcycle wreck. I knew he wasn't living life the way he was supposed to, but to come home and find out Zach had died was difficult. But as time went on, more and more things came out, and maybe it wasn't an accident, and there were things that was done by a friend supposedly of his to cause that accident. And I was like, I hope he gets what he deserves. And sure enough, he did. He went to prison. And as I later heard the story, he died a painful death because of a disease that he got in prison. And there was a part of me that's like, you got what you deserved. But then, when I went through a difficult time, I will never forget a text that I got from a person that I had once considered my friend. And that text just simply said this: karma is and you know the rest of it. And he was celebrating in my difficult days. And it felt awful. It made the depth and the loneliness so tough because I thought, everybody's against me. And it makes me think, can you imagine as the Israelites were being marched out of their city and they were taken to a place they didn't know, and there are people that they knew were relatives, and they were cheering and they were jeering the downfall. And they said, we want to add to that. You see, God isn't one of those that ever cheers our failure. He doesn't. He doesn't look and say, that's what you deserve. In fact, oftentimes, he wants to say, he doesn't want to tell Edom, this is what I've got to do to you to punish you, but you won't listen any other way. Most of the time, it's come to me. And if we're believers, we should never, ever be the people that celebrate the fall or destruction of anybody else. We should never be happy when a person is going through pain. We shouldn't be the one that says, you're getting what you deserve. But instead, we should be the one that opens our arms, and while they're hurting, we're the ones that give them a place to go. That's the reason Paul writes in Galatians chapter 6, verse 2, he says, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. If anyone thinks they're something when they're not, they deceive themselves. You know what a big part of the problem with the Edomites was? They thought that they were better than anybody else. They had this pride. And when we look at the destruction of somebody else, or as they're going through difficult pain, we're dealing with internal pride. And God calls us to not. The third thing is this: don't put your trust in temporary things. The Edomites were rich. They set up on their mountain and they attacked different people. In fact, most people think, and theologians think, that the Edomites were those who were serving in the army of the Babylonians because they were such great warriors. And so they thought, we have a home that cannot be touched. We have money that nobody knows about. We have power, but everybody looks at, and we have influence with other people. And so we will be protected because of our allies. And they put their trust in temporary things. And sometimes I look at our country and I think that's one of the things we have to be careful with. We think that we're rich and that will save us. We think that our military is what protects us. We think our location is better than anybody else. And we quit trusting in God. We start trusting in things that are temporary. And I think sometimes we do the same things as individuals. My 401k will protect me from whatever goes up or whatever goes down. And yet God says, don't worry about those things. Look at the birds. They dress themselves. We think that our strength or our connections. There's only one connection that we can put trust in, and that's God. And that's where we should trust in Him. You see, our goal in life is not to find contentment in this world, but it's to use what we have to share our faith with other people. And the secondary goal, and maybe it should be the first, is our contentment should only be in a Savior that can save us forever. I don't know where you are in your faith, and maybe some of you, you struggle with just holding on. It's hard not to hold on just to things that are temporary. And maybe you're one of those that you've never had a foundation in Jesus Christ. And you want to make that decision today. We want to give you that opportunity. Or there may be some of you here that you've moved away from that foundation and you know it. And you know that you've been relying on other things, and maybe you've been celebrating the downfall of other things, and there's just some bitterness in your heart you need to get rid of. In a moment, as our worship team comes and they lead us in our invitation, I want to give you an opportunity to pray. You see, throughout our building, there are people that just want to pray, or if you want to come up here and pray and reconnect to who God is for you. You see, God wants to celebrate the restoration. The day of the Lord is coming for all of us. And I want it to be a celebration, not a reckoning.